Hello, and welcome to Relaxing Facts. I'm Chad Kay, and today I will be talking about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Each week, I share interesting stories and little-known facts on a variety of topics, accompanied by gentle, soothing music. My goal is to help you find a sense of calm during your busy day. Feel free to settle into a cozy spot and let yourself be carried away by these relaxing facts. Rome's path to becoming an empire was neither smooth nor inevitable. It began as a small city-state on the Italian peninsula. By the 3rd century BC, Rome had expanded enough to clash with the great naval power of Carthage, leading to the Punic Wars. These wars were brutal and transformative. The Second Punic War, in particular, tested Rome's survival when the Carthaginian general Hannibal famously crossed the Alps with war elephants to invade Italy. Though he won spectacular victories, Rome endured. Eventually, Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, cementing Rome as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Victory brought wealth, but also tension. Conquered lands poured grain and slaves into Rome, undermining small farmers and deepening social inequality. Senators grew richer, while the poor crowded into Rome, relying on handouts. Reformers tried to redistribute land to struggling citizens, but they were killed by political enemies. These violent deaths revealed that the Republic's institutions were struggling to contain growing divisions. Ambitious generals exploited the chaos. First came Marius and Sulla, who turned their armies against Rome itself. Then came Julius Caesar. His conquest of Gaul from 58 to 50 BC added enormous territory to Rome's control and made him immensely popular. When the Senate, led by his rival Pompey, ordered him to disband his army, Caesar instead crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BC, famously declaring that the die is cast. Civil war followed, and Caesar emerged victorious. Though he refused the title of king, Caesar held supreme power as dictator for life. His assassination in 44 BC by senators like Brutus and Cassius was meant to restore the Republic, but instead it plunged Rome into years of further conflict. Out of the chaos rose Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. After defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the naval Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian became Augustus, Rome's first emperor. With him, the Republic was over in practice, even if the Senate continued to exist as a ceremonial body. Under Augustus and his successors, Rome entered 2 centuries of remarkable stability known as the Pax Romana. This was not peace in the modern sense. Roman legions continued to wage campaigns in Germania, Britain, and along the Danube. But the empire's core enjoyed prosperity, security, and impressive cultural growth. The imperial administration standardized taxation, established a professional bureaucracy, and developed an extensive road network, over 250,000 miles by some estimates. Roman roads were so well built that many are still visible today, laid out in straight lines, paved with stone, and engineered with drainage ditches. These roads allowed rapid movement of soldiers, trade goods, and information, binding the empire together. The empire stretched from Spain in the west to Syria in the east, and from Britain in the north to Egypt in the south. Each province contributed something unique: grain from Egypt, olive oil from Spain, marble from Greece, and slaves from conquered territories. Trade flowed along the Mediterranean, so much so that the Romans called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. Rome also dazzled with monumental architecture. Amphitheaters hosted gladiator games, while aqueducts carried clean water into cities, some running for dozens of miles. The Colosseum, completed in the year 80 AD under Emperor Titus, could seat over 50,000 spectators. Engineering feats like concrete construction and the arch allowed Romans to build on a scale never seen before. The empire's cultural world was equally rich. Greek philosophy, art, and literature heavily influenced Roman elites. Writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid shaped Rome's cultural identity. Stoic philosophy, promoted by figures like Seneca and later Emperor Marcus Aurelius, emphasized duty, rationality, and endurance in the face of hardship, values that resonated in a sprawling, sometimes chaotic empire. For Rome's elite, life could be luxurious. Wealthy senators and equestrians owned sprawling villas decorated with frescoes and mosaics. They dined on exotic foods: dormice stuffed with nuts, oysters from Britain, and spices imported from India via trade routes that stretched into the Indian Ocean. The majority, however, lived very differently. The urban poor crowded into insulae, tall apartment blocks made out of wood and brick. Fires were frequent, and sanitation was poor. To keep unrest at bay, emperors distributed free grain and sponsored public games. The phrase "bread and circuses" reflected this policy. As long as people were fed and entertained, they were less likely to revolt. Religion permeated daily life. Romans worshipped a pantheon of gods: Jupiter, Juno, Mars, Venus, and countless local deities. Household gods protected families. Emperors also encouraged the worship of themselves as divine figures, which reinforced loyalty to the state. Over time, however, new religions spread, including Christianity. At first, Christians were persecuted for refusing to worship the emperor. Yet the faith spread rapidly, offering hope of salvation and community. By the 4th century, Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity, forever altering the empire's spiritual identity. Roman entertainment was famously spectacular. Gladiators, often slaves, prisoners, or volunteers seeking fame, fought in arenas for the crowd's amusement. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus could draw hundreds of thousands, with factions of fans, known as blues and greens, sometimes rioting violently. Theater, poetry recitals, and public baths also offered leisure and socialization. Despite its power, Rome faced constant pressures. The empire's vast size was a strength, but also a weakness. Defending long borders required enormous resources. By the 3rd century AD, problems multiplied. Plagues reduced populations, inflation weakened the economy, and political instability turned the throne into a revolving door. In one 50-year span, over 20 emperors ruled, most dying violently. The military, once Rome's pride, became less reliable. Armies increasingly relied on mercenaries and federated barbarian tribes who sometimes turned against Rome. Meanwhile, corruption and heavy taxation strained ordinary citizens. In the year 285, Emperor Diocletian tried to solve these problems by dividing the empire into eastern and western halves. The east, with wealthy cities like Constantinople, remained strong. The west, with its weaker economy and more vulnerable borders, struggled. Constantine, ruling in the early 4th century, attempted reunification and established Constantinople as a new Rome in the east. His support for Christianity transformed the empire's religious landscape. Yet the Western Empire continued to falter. By the 5th century, Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths pressed into Roman lands, driven partly by the advance of the Huns. In the year 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome, a symbolic shock, though the empire still staggered on. In 455, the Vandals repeated the feat. Finally, in 476, the Germanic leader Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus. The Western Roman Empire had fallen. Although the Western Empire collapsed, Rome's legacy endured. The eastern half, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, culture, and traditions. Justinian's codification of Roman law in the 6th century influenced European legal systems for centuries. Latin remained the language of learning, administration, and the church, evolving into the Romance languages still spoken today. Roman architecture and engineering set standards that continue to inspire. Arches, domes, and concrete revolutionized construction. Political thinkers in later eras, from Renaissance humanists to the framers of modern constitutions, looked to Rome for models of citizenship, law, and republican ideals. Even in popular culture, Rome's image lingers. Movies, novels, and television repeatedly return to its gladiators, emperors, and intrigues. Rome's rise and fall continue to serve as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder of human ambition, ingenuity, and the fragility of power. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's talk about the Roman Empire. If you like this episode of Relaxing Facts, I would really love for you to subscribe or leave a comment. I hope you have a fantastic day, whether you're taking a moment to unwind or simply enjoying some calming listening. Thank you so much for being here. I am Chad K, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.